Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Brittany Martinez, the executive director of Principles First. Brittany, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me back.
I'm sure you had a late night as you were tuned in to the State of the Union. President Trump delivered his first one of his second term. And in terms of length, it was historic. It was clocking in at 1 hour and 48 minutes. President Trump touted the state of our union as strong, but a CBS News poll taken before the speech said the word most Americans would use to describe the state of the country right now would be divided. So, to start off the conversation, what are some of your takeaways from the speech?
Brittany, that's funny. I actually submitted an op-ed immediately following the State of the Union for publication, and the prompt was is use one word to describe State of the Union and then go into why. And the word that I used was divisive. I think Americans are right on the nail on this one. There were some great parts like honoring some of our veterans and heroes, and I think that's amazing, and it's a testament to American resilience and spirit. But he also called Democrats crazy. I don't know that we've ever seen something like that before. He was very much othering, which is something that we always see. And listen, Democrats also protested and were outspoken at times during the speech, but he's president of the United States. He needs to stop taking the bait, but he never stops taking the bait. And so it was really disappointing in that sense.
Yeah, that was something that I wrote down. I mean, that was one of my takeaways, too, that he explicitly said they are crazy. I'm curious, with midterms coming up in just a few months, do you think that's going to be the Republican tagline going forward? Hey, we're the party of norms, they're the crazy ones.
I think that would be a terrible direction to go, and just pointing the finger. I say this often about Democrats too, and I said this during our summit that we just had last weekend. Democrats can't just be anti-Trump. They have to be for something, and the something needs to be American families, American workers, and the economy. The same thing with Republicans. They can't just say those guys over there, hey, look, they're crazy and we're normal, when in reality we also see a lot of really unhinged things coming out from the Republicans, particularly the president of the United States. So no, I think their message needs to be focused on the economy, making it better. Trump tried to tout the economy. As we know, Americans aren't necessarily feeling that at this moment. And I think we have to be really honest about the situation and how we progress forward as a nation, not just blame people, but what are your solutions?
To that point, that same CBS News poll, it had the top issues Americans wanted to hear about in this speech. They were the cost of living and prices, the economy, and ICE and deportation operations. President Trump said the economy was roaring back. He inherited a dismal economy, and he's getting it back on track. Where do you think that messaging is at with how Americans feel? Because there is a disconnect, because a lot of people think that the economy is not working for them right now.
I'd say that he spent a little bit too much time talking about Biden and the previous administration. I haven't counted myself, but from my understanding on reports that I've seen, he mentioned Biden about a dozen times, and also just referencing the administration versus the contrast to now what he's doing. A little bit too much. I think he needs to be forward looking and forward thinking. This is what happened with Biden in the last election, right? It was that he was saying we're bouncing back from COVID. We are on track, but Americans aren't feeling it. So when you have a president of the United States at the lectern, who also happens to be a billionaire, telling you how much the economy is roaring, and you don't feel that, that's tone deaf. And that's falling on the ears of Americans who just don't buy it.
You and I have talked about this before, but a lot of Americans, the majority of Americans, think ICE is too aggressive. They've gone too far. And just a month ago, we saw two American citizens shot in Minneapolis by federal agents while there was an immigration operation underway there. President Trump did not mention them at all during his speech, Alex Preddy and Renee Good, but he did talk about immigration. I want to bring us to this moment and ask you about it. He invited attendees to stand if, quote, the first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. He said, stand if you agree with that. Democrats did not stand. And clearly it seemed like he was trying to make this moment for cameras, that Republicans agree with this and Democrats don't. What do you make of Democrats not standing there?
Obviously, I would hope that if you're in an elected office, especially to the level of Congress, that supporting the American people is your number one goal. My takeaway is not that Democrats disagree with that notion, but that they're not going to fall for the rhetoric of Trump and his continued divisiveness. I think that he had a missed opportunity in not talking about Minneapolis and what has happened and addressing that. We've seen him say, following that shortly, he said, oh, well, maybe we do need to change some things. Like maybe this is too aggressive, and to not even acknowledge that and then put the blame on Democrats that they care about illegal immigrants and they don't care about you. We saw a similar tactic back in 2024 when, the Trump administration and PACs said Kamala Harris cares about like transgender inmates, right? And they made it about that issue because I think she maybe offhanded made a comment, and that was the ad that they chose to run. And so I can absolutely see Republicans sort of trying to capitalize on this. I think there may be some rules around what is and isn't allowed to be used in ads as far as congressional floor is concerned. I could be wrong there, but you're right. It was for the moment. It was for the meme and for the imagery of it. And it's a shame. This is a moment when it shouldn't be about politics. It should be about policy, and it should be about things to bring people together. And once again, it's just a missed opportunity where we tried once again, or the president tried once again to divide Republicans and Democrats.
He did touch on one policy, his trade policy, because that suffered a major blow last week. The Supreme Court struck down a large swath of his tariffs, the Liberation Day tariffs. And on Friday, a few hours after that decision was announced, he said he was ashamed of Supreme Court justices. The decision was an embarrassment to their families and, quote, they're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. And some of those justices were sitting there in the audience last night. He was talking about it. He obviously disagreed with their decision. He said they're working on alternatives and congressional action will not be necessary. What do you make of that? Because he said, hey, congressional action isn't necessary to Congress.
Nothing that he says surprises me. To those comments that he made Friday, he also made some of them last night in front of the Supreme Court. And I think he forgets that we have three separate but equal branches of government. It is not the Trump show. We have the Supreme Court for a reason. We have Congress for a reason. We've seen Congress time and time again under this administration sort of relinquish their powers, as they have with tariffs. And, you can sign an executive order. He was talking about all these executive orders that he signed and what a big deal it is. As we've talked about before, I'm pretty sure, Brittany, it's executive orders do not have staying power. The first day of a new administration, if it's the opposite party, they can just undo all of those executive orders. So it really does make a difference for him to go through congressional action on all of these things. And if he really does want to have lasting policy change, that's what he should be doing, rather than just signing with the pen and then saying, look at what I've done, when it's not going to affect people in the long term.
I want to talk about some moments that garnered a lot of support. One being that, the showmanship on full display here. The men's Olympic hockey team came in. He recognized them. He said he would give the goalie the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He awarded the Medal of Honor twice, a Purple Heart, and the Legion of Merit. What do you make of those moments?
I think those are great moments. I think, sort of to what we were talking about earlier, I'm proud to be an American. The reason that I give feedback and constructive feedback is because I am patriotic, and it is my duty to do those things. So to have moments where we get to honor our heroes, our veterans, Purple Heart, Medal of Honor, Presidential Medal of Freedom, I think that those are wonderful things. And being able to highlight some of our Olympic athletes, we haven't won the men's hockey since 1980. So no, I'm not going to advocate against doing that. I think that it is important to make sure that Americans see growth and prosperity in these ways. And so I'm glad that we did that. That would probably be my only highlight of the evening, to be honest with you.
He also talked about, or urged rather, members of Congress to support a congressional stock trading ban. And members of both parties stood up, a lot of Democrats included. He did make a swipe, though, immediately after, asking if former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi stood up. What did you make of that moment?
he just can't let it go. He just can't let it go. He can never just be normal. You know, that was one of those moments where I kind of rolled my eyes, but I also chuckled a little bit because that is the sort of Trump that a lot of people like. But it just is also very immature. I was waiting for the camera to pan to Nancy Pelosi. I don't recall that it did. I'm not sure if she was one of the members who just declined the invitation to be part of the State of the Union last night. But it's just dig after dig. You know, I could be wrong, Brittany, but and especially as I've worked in politics, I've really worked during the Trump era and during a little bit of the Obama era, probably the latter half. And I, you know, grew up watching State of the Unions and debates, et cetera, et cetera. I can't really recall a time where it was just singling people out. And the thing that's actually really funny about that is that if this was just a normal congressional speech, like members in the chamber, if you call someone out by name, you're not allowed to. You get in trouble for that. So it's sort of ironic that on the State of the Union, the president continues to call people out by name and call them crazy and out of their name. And I just think that was really inappropriate. Not a big fan of Nancy Pelosi, but even then, you know, for the State of the Union, I didn't really like that too much.
Do you now want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Iran? Because in that same CBS News poll that I've cited in the past, it found that the vast majority of Americans feel that the Trump administration hasn't clearly explained the U.S. military position on Iran yet. And it seemed like in this speech, he was making a potential pitch for potential conflict with Iran. There has been reporting in recent days and weeks that President Trump is weighing a possible U.S. strike against Iran, and this comes as U.S. officials with Iranian officials are negotiating over Iran's nuclear program, and it also comes as the United States military is building up their presence in the region. And I want to read in part something President Trump said about Iran in the State of the Union. He said this: "They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. My preference is to solve this problem through diplomacy, but one thing is certain. I will never allow the world's number one sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon. Can't let that happen." What did you make of President Trump's remarks on Iran?
I mean, I understand the sentiment of not wanting the biggest adversary to have a nuclear weapon, but for him to say, I'm waiting for them to say that statement explicitly, I mean, it's not going to happen, right? And if we're just being honest about it, though we wish and we can negotiate, it's not going to happen. We've seen similarly with ceasefires, you know, in the last year, and then ceasefires break, even though we've negotiated the ceasefire. And so I think that's an unrealistic expectation, though, of course, that should always be the goal. And when it comes to Iran and Americans' expectations and a little bit of not understanding, I do find it interesting. We're the United States. We need to be the top global superpower, peace through strength, and also letting people know that they can't mess with us. However, entering the region at this time or thinking about it, I don't know if he said troops on the ground necessarily, but it's concerning. You know, we've grown up with the war on terror and having siblings or parents or maybe even us, right, people watching go into the Middle East, and you know, now we can look back and say things, and we can look back, hindsight is 2020, I guess, but we can look back and decide whether that was the right thing to do or not. And so I do find it interesting that the peace president, who just also happened to rename the Department of War that name, is doing this. And I think he's going to have a lot of explaining to do to Americans.
And there was reporting last week that said most Americans don't know how close we are to military conflict with Iran. And I think if you're one of those Americans who isn't completely tapped in to the news, maybe you're just more of a passive watcher, if you tuned into the State of the Union last night, do you think you got a clear understanding of just how close we could be?
No, I would say probably not. I think that, yeah, if you're just sort of tuning in, maybe you're listening to your local news, getting the weather. We just had a blizzard, right? If you're kind of one of those folks, which I would say is probably the majority of Americans, this might be the first time you're really hearing about it, to be honest with you. And probably alarming because when we think about that, it sort of brings up emotions of that time in the early 2000s. And, I think Americans probably expect more of an answer interpretation of what is happening right now.
I do now want to turn to the Democratic response. It was from Governor Abigail Spanberger. She's the governor of Virginia. She just won her election in November, and she delivered the response. And historically, there's not a whole lot of upside to being in this position, right? Because if you did a good job, no one really remembers. If you did a bad job, you're made fun of on SNL, a la Senator Katie Britt in 2024. We remember Joe Kennedy with the chapstick. Obviously, who can forget then Senator Marco Rubio with the water? How do you think she did?
So yes, as far as her response last night, I do think that she did a fair job. To your point, I don't know that it's necessarily very, very memorable. She is a new governor, and it seems like when it's a freshman, someone who's just gotten in, they kind of get that opportunity, a fresh face. I do think that she probably has some bigger aspirations, maybe for president one day. She did a fine job. And I think she did well for what she was expected to do.
And I don't think she'll be on SNL this weekend because it's not like she had any of those especially memorable moments either way, according to this conversation. But I want to talk about the questions that she posed. She posed 3. Is the president working to make life more affordable for you and your family? Is the president working to keep Americans safe, both at home and abroad? Is the president working for you? Do you think President Trump, in his State of the Union address, the longest one in history, do you think he answered any of those questions?
I think it was smart of her to say those questions and she repeated them. People tend to remember things in threes. So I think she did do a good job as far as that. As far as answering the question, I think he did in his own way. Now, whether all of those things are accurate or not, I know that there have been fact checkers very busy since the speech last night trying to say whether what he said or not was a little exaggerated or how honest it is. It did leave much to be desired, especially when we're getting into sort of some of this divisive rhetoric, which American people, as per your poll, already decided we are kind of in that time right now with the divisiveness.
I can remember back in 2024, President Biden delivered his State of the Union, and Democrats said, look, he's not old, he has energy, look at how vivacious he delivered that speech. But aside from that speech, I can't really remember a State of the Union that changed hearts and minds, that was that important. Do you think this was one of those? Do you think this is important in any way, especially as we are in a midterms year?
I remember everyone said they must have given him a Red Bull right before he went on or something, but forgot about it until you mentioned it in this moment, right? And I think it's memorable in that, one, it was the longest one ever. 2, the fact that he did say crazy and sort of the othering. I do think that is a standout. Now, will that stand out the most? In the next few years that we have in the Trump presidency, who knows? But I'll definitely remember that for the foreseeable future, at least.
And my last question to you, I have to boil it down to this. If you could grade President Trump's State of the Union address, A through F, what grade are you giving it?
I would give it, honestly, like a C- or a D+. I'm not going to say a total failure. I did like, again, that he brought out some of our veterans and heroes and rewarded them. I think that's important. I think that is a way to bring the country together, but also it's almost in the same breath you're saying you're crazy. So I didn't find that very attractive within the speech. And so I think that there is a lot left to be desired, and hopefully this can be a turning moment in trying to unify the country. But given how things are and who we're talking about, it's probably unlikely, in my opinion.
Brittany Martinez, I always appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time.
Thanks for having me.